All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning and happy Valentine's Day. If you haven't started your Valentine's Day shopping, it's not too late to run ahead and get that done so that you will not be in the doghouse later today or tomorrow. And I guess that relates to our topic today. This is Jim Satterfield speaking to you, and it's behavioral risk threat assessment. That's a behavior that there's certainly a risk with as we talk about it. And we're going to be talking about how do you stop bullying, suicide, and guns before it's too late, and go through that program. And we've got a good turnout today from the Virginia Association of Schools, and we have one school that's got a very large delegation. So we're glad to have you with us today as we talk about this webinar. We'd like you to be our friend at Firestorm Seoul on Twitter or on Facebook. It's Firestorm Solutions. There is a hashtag for today's event, and that hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value. We empower you and your school to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Firestorm is America's crisis coach, and really what we're trying to do is to balance that difference between the risk that's there and keep you from being in a crisis at a later time. Now, as we think through this, our attorneys make us have a disclaimer. Don't you just love attorneys? The presentation is not complete without the oral comments and discussion. Any work product that we provide must be viewed in conjunction from regional, national, and local authorities, as well as your school's personal counsel. Moreover, the information given and the comments made are not to be interpreted as legal advice. Now, that gets me off the hook with all the attorneys, and we can get on with our thoughts. Kim couldn't be with us this morning. She just gave us a call a few minutes ago, and one of the things that's great to have the Virginia Association of Schools and what they do for all of the schools in the state and the programs that they offer, I would encourage you to check their website and see what's happening. And let's see, I don't know if we have Ken or Ryan Mercer with us today. Ken or Ryan, are you guys here? Well, what we did, for those of you who have not met them yet, I think we have Ken's picture up and Ryan's name under it. And I think I heard them speak. Who's here today?
This is Ken. Sorry, Jim.
No problem. Well, I've got your picture up, but I've got Ryan's name, and I saw you were a late arrival. Anything you want to say about the Virginia Association of Independent Schools or any other comments this morning?
I want to thank them again for allowing us to join with them to do this program. It's been a great monthly program. Ryan and I will be attending the conference on March 30th and 31st in Williamsburg. So we look forward to meeting all of you at that time. Thank you very much.
And the networking opportunity at that event is great. So you can go and find out what other schools are doing in these areas, and I think that's one of the big benefits of the association is that sharing. You can go to firestorm.com and watch past webinars and download briefs and white papers on the subjects, and there will be a brief based on today's presentation. You can also register for future events there, and this is the second in the 2017 Crisis Coach webinar series for the Virginia Association of Independent Schools. We've been doing this now, I think this is the start of our third year together, and so there's a recorded library that you can go back and view and use that for training within your schools. The mission of the association you see up on the screen, and again, we thank them for their support in underwriting this webinar series. I'm Jim Satterfield. I'm president and co-founder of Firestorm, and I'm looking forward to being with you today as we talk about this important subject and focus on what it means within your schools. For the school with the team involved, hopefully you're all together and you can kind of take some notes, and I will make sure and coordinate with Ken and Ryan so they follow back up with you personally to answer any questions that discussion generates. So when we use this word crisis, I would ask you to stop for a minute and think about what comes to mind. What is it that you're concerned about when it happens? You see up on the screen a lot of different things and images. By the way, I don't think those palm trees were shot in Virginia there. But I think as you think through each of these elements, whether it's violence coming from terrorism or civil unrest, whether it's natural disasters and events, cyber breach, there's a great many things that are occurring that would create that crisis. And it is a turning point. JFK in his book talked about it being the combination of two symbols, one for danger and one for crisis in the Chinese alphabet. And if you focus only on one portion of that, you're going to lose the potential that we need to look at. Because the trend of all future events comes here. So let's make it simple. Here are all the schools in the state of Virginia. We've carefully drawn them out there. You can probably spot your school. Well, wait a minute, they all kind of blend together. Well, what happens is that the worst disaster you'll ever see is the one that happens to your school, and that's where that little red dot had appeared in that screen. The reason we're talking about planning and trying to identify those events, we want to be able to identify behaviors of concern before they escalate to violence, because now your school blends back in with everyone else that's out there. You don't want to be defined by that event, because when the crisis comes, when the disaster happens, when the active shooter or the bullying or the events that come into play, it's going to dominate and dominate the landscape, and your school then will be known for that event. If I were to mention Columbine to you at this point, you wouldn't immediately say, well, gee, Jim, that's the state flower of Colorado. By the way, it is. You would be thinking immediately about the shooting event that's occurred. And so those things start to define who we are, how we respond, and what the elements are within that. But, okay, I get it, Jim. If we have a bad event, it's going to dominate around. Everybody in the area is going to know what's going on. Well, where do we start? Well, the first thing to talk about is a crisis isn't business as usual. It's business as unusual. It's a different set of facts. And we find that everything you learn initially in this crisis is wrong, and you're going to be forced to make decisions based upon wrong or incomplete information. So we want to drill down today and talk about the lessons that we've learned in this area and give you some insights. We're going to go through this information 3 different times in slightly different ways to make sure that we're all on exactly the same base, and then give you a framework to make decisions regarding behaviors of concern before they in fact escalate for violence. Now, we've used this term about behavior, but let's think about threatening behavior first. Well, that's pretty clear. I mean, if somebody's standing there and you see somebody being bullied, or there's a fight, or they're stalking, or someone comes and brings a gun to school, then that's pretty clear. We can set that on target. Those behaviors become much easier for us to interact with and to start to take action before the violence level there. You'll notice that some of those, however, those threats are actually threats, and in some cases actually acting on those threats and coming in. But there's some behaviors that aren't quite so clear. And you see a long list here, and fascination with weapons, the loner, the odd behavior, the substance abuse, domestic violence. By the way, domestic violence comes to school, both for students and teachers, in an area that we look at. So seeing those behaviors, we may see symptoms of them, but it's sometimes harder to see that behavior clearly to identify it. And we're going to be giving you tools today to help in those areas. I also want you to look in that second column at the word in red that says change. That's one of the biggest indicators. When we've got someone that's generally had good attendance and has bad attendance, someone that was getting good grades and now they're not, someone that was a member on the teams and now they're dropping out, someone who used to sit with their friends in the cafeteria at lunch, but now they sit behind themselves. Change is one of the biggest indicators of behaviors of concern that we want to focus on as we talk. Now, secondly, we're looking at behavior and not demographics, and that's an important difference here as we are trying to make some decisions about who is on a path to violence, who is someone that's a threat to themselves or others in each of those areas. How can we best intervene? Now, there are protective factors, and you see those listed there. Interest outside of school, coping skills, personal attachments, all of those elements start to play into helping mitigate the potential for violence. So we've given you a quick snapshot about threats and about behaviors of concern. Let's go a little bit more under the cover and talk about what leads to violence. We've given you 3 lists here. One related to a breakdown of support systems, something happened in family or in the marriage, a divorce, financial difficulty. That's going to add stress into that particular individual. Personal factors, low self-esteem, aggression, substance abuse in any particular area, and then workplace or school factors, something that's happening in that area, insecurity, conflict. We see kids not wanting to go to school because of how they're treated and what's going on each of those areas. So those would start to give us a better idea of leading on to a path of violence. So who might pose a threat? Who's the highest risk? And we did a session the other day with a large insurance company, and they specialize in coverages for churches. And in doing it, we had some 4,000 people on that webinar, and going through it, we got a phone call immediately after where they had identified a member in a particular church who had everything on the list, and what do we do and how do we do about it. Now, normally you're not going to have somebody that touches every one of those, but the more of those behaviors that you start to see will give you some idea about the risk is starting to escalate. One is a little. One may be enough to be a tipping point, but it might be 2 or 3 or 4 of those in coming together. Now, so let's go through some of these red flags in particular. One is suicide. It's never a joke. And we've got virtually 100% correlation in the school environment that if someone is threatening suicide, they invariably have a kill list. They want to get even with the people that they feel have treated them poorly, and so they're going to take them out before they take their own life. And so this area is an immediate escalation factor. Any reference to suicide, you have to assume that that's a real threat and a real event. Intimidating comments about hurting someone. They're gonna pay for this. I'm gonna beat them up. I'm gonna hit them. I'm gonna shoot them. The more targeted the threat, the higher the likelihood, and the more consideration. People that just are out of control. When you're thinking of students, we've also seen this behavior happen with teachers and staff. Again, that fit of rage is a clear indicator. And then finally, destroying properties. We were working with a school just up the road from Virginia, and there was a student who became so upset he was putting his fist through the sheetrock in the classroom area to take those events. So these are all very clear red flags. We're trying to get this in your mind as a significant step up. So let's continue on a little bit. That some fascination with weapons. Well, if you grew up in a family where hunting is a big part, you've got an interest there. But look at those other lines underneath it. Past criminals or violence. Unfortunately, every year at the anniversary of events like Virginia Tech and Columbine, we see people who want to be copycats or to do better, to carry those actions out. So that fascination, that change is an area to look at, and it would at least be a factor that you'd want to start to consider. Depression. Depression is a big precursor of suicide and hopelessness within each of those areas. By the way, on all of these red flags and all of these behaviors of concern, a piece of advice that we would give you is to put a face on each one of them. Think about someone that you've known in your career. Maybe you worked with them at another school, or maybe you were a student and they were a classmate, or it could be someone in your own school. Because if you think about that, it starts to give you a frame of reference to look and make those decisions. And then substance abuse or drugs and alcohol. Obviously, this is an escape and a coping mechanism, and it's going to have some impact on their ability for judgment and response. Suspected abuse in the home, someone who is abused at home, we see that coming to school and becoming a factor. The number 2 cause of death in women in the workplace is domestic violence. So the spouse knows where they're going to be at the start of the day, at the end of the day, and that violence comes to school directly from the home. And major changes in behavior, withdrawing from friends and activities, the person that now becomes a loner. Now, what we've tried to do so far is we presented this, I think, 2 different ways, and we're going to do yet again one more in just a few minutes. But I want now to at least have put us on a common platform, thinking about threats and behaviors of concern. Now, we mentioned mitigating factors, and so I don't want to lose that, and that's a kind of a shield and a protecting factor. And personal attachments. If we can get that person to feel that they're not alone, that there are people that are looking to them and helping, taking responsibility, expecting authority, helping our young people grow with coping skills, and interest outside of just going to school every day. Is it athletics? Is it something at the church? Is it something in their community? Is it a hobby? Those then start to lower the risk factors that we've talked about up to this point. Okay, Jim, it's great. I got it. Threats, behaviors of concern, protective factors, we can see those. How do we put all this together? And that's where having a program that deals with behavioral risk threat assessment, and we'll go through those 4 components, and we'll give you a good feel for that today. And there's a special program that you can do through, as in cooperation with the Virginia Association of Independent Schools, that you can put this into your school and have an opportunity to get it in place now and not have to pay the first-year license fee associated with it. And I'll mention that at the end. So there are 4 key elements in a behavioral risk threat assessment program. First, there's awareness training. Everybody has to know about all the things that we've been talking about. How do they see those things? What is going to happen? And that it comes forward. We had a program with multiple schools where things are seen and the students felt like, well, I don't know if I should say something. Somebody else will turn that in. Getting that awareness training for everyone so you don't lose that information. That opens the door to create an intelligence network. An intelligence network contains a series of elements. One is anonymous reporting. You have to have the ability to get that information in so that you would hear about it without it having to be discovered elsewhere. And today's environment, our young people text, so you need a system that does anonymous two-way texting so that they can send a text and no one would know that they did the report. You go out to dinner and you see young people text from pass the salt from one side to the other as opposed to just saying that. Back in earlier generations, we think about an anonymous tip line coming in. Social media monitoring is another program. You probably have software that measures what the response rate is on the website or into promotions or advertisements that you use. It can be adapted to be a risk tool to identify behaviors of concern. Firestorm has a chief intelligence officer. Her name's Karen Mazzullo. And Karen was looking at a picture on the internet of a classroom and a student with a gun in it. And it bothered her at a very base level, so she started doing research, figured out it was a math class, figured out that it was the teacher's name, and was able to place it in a school in South Carolina. She contacted the school leadership and said, I don't know if it's a new picture or an old picture. I don't know if it's a real gun or a fake gun, but I knew you would want to know. The head of the school went to the classroom, and sure enough, the student was in the classroom and had a gun. They were able to handle the student without anyone being hurt or injured or shot. And he called her back and thanked her for sharing the information. And he said, the thing that disturbed me the most is we had 35 students in the classroom, and many of them were posting on social media. Not one told a teacher or an administrator in the school. And they had done a program on See Something, Say Something. This is a cultural element. It goes to the ethics program in your school, the moral values that you're teaching. It's a key element to have in place. And social media monitoring, we are very blessed today with these types of tools in that 80% of the time if someone has ill intent, somebody else knows, and 67% of the time if someone has ill intent, 2 or more people know, and when people know, they talk. And where do they talk? They talk on social media. Pre-screening background checks, as you all know, in the school area, for any teachers or volunteers, you have to do annual background checks. It's critical that you do that both at the federal felony database as well as the county courthouse for misdemeanors. You could have been arrested for a felony, plea bargained it down to a misdemeanor, and it wouldn't be found in the felony national database. Also, you would pick up things like a DUI and domestic violence areas. Would you want to know those people that are driving for the field trip had a DUI? It's an important element. If you're not doing annual background checks at the local level, then you're not in compliance with standards and best practices. And finally, key metrics. Again, that word change. Changes in performance, changes in grades, changes in attendance, dropping out of an organization. Think about those elements as also being key as part of your intelligence network. By the way, the term of art today is open source intelligence. Now, it's great. We've got all this awareness. We've got all these tips. We've got everything. What do we do with it? So that's kept. That teacher saw this tip that came in, and it all gets put together. You can do it on paper and keep it in a file cabinet. There are systems that can do that for you digitally, and we can talk about it, but it all would come before your school's threat management team or behavioral management team, depending upon which way you would want to talk about it and discuss it. We'll visit this again in just a few minutes. And then finally, the BeRThA plan, the Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment Program. And in your school, you would then have to have a way to take that tip in. We recommend that each school have an administrator on duty to do the initial categorization of that particular risk, and I'll show you how that works in just a moment. And then if it is one that we need to investigate more, it goes to the school's behavioral management team, and generally that's made up of 3 people. Someone representing the counseling function in the school, could be counseling or HR, someone representing the academic portion of the school, and then someone representing the safety, security, facilities portion of the school together. We find that 3 people making a decision will make a difference, and you'll get a much more accurate assessment of what the exposures are. And there has to be sign-off and record-keeping and forms, and again, we'll talk about it. Okay, so we've given you a structure with the Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment Program. Let's go back and look at those behaviors one more time. So you do a behavioral snapshot. What are those risk factors? What are the warning signs? And how do they all come together? And a snapshot is a picture in a single point of time, and you really want to put multiple of those snapshots together to see, is this behavior escalating or is it de-escalating? It becomes important. So each one of those puzzle parts, there are particular behaviors that would impact that. And I'll show you those on the coming slides, but it's a different way to group the information that we've already been talking about in today's session. So first, in that school to social peer interaction, holding a grudge, name calling, abusive language, identification with gangs, those would be behaviors of concern that we want to intervene with now before there's violence. Looking again at the family, suspected abuse, changes in marital status, a divorce, child custody issues, loss of a job, foreclosures on a home, multiple losses in a period of time. The physiological, paranoid thinking, poor coping skills. Look at the last 2. Pattern of under-controlled anger, pattern of over-controlled anger. Both of those are indicators of a behavior of concern. The urgent group really start to get into these actions that we can't just overlook. Suicide, stalking, fighting. those are we cannot ignore, and they go to the top of our list of behaviors that we would immediately respond. And here an extended behavioral list listed here: history of anger, acts of harassment, grievances, consistent poor work relationships or school relationships. So as you look at those all come together to create this pattern, this snapshot that we're having to deal with. Now, as that's done, there are protective factors. We listed those earlier. You see them here again. And the more of those that are present, then the lower the expectation that this is a path to violence and that we could come together. So I want to go back and talk about how we fit all of these puzzle pieces together to get the right decision, to do the intervention before it escalates to violence. And so the Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment program is set up on the screen here. And by the way, I'm an engineer by background, so you can sometimes see there's lots of drawings and listing. The awareness portion that we talked about earlier is over on the left. That's awareness training that we do for our students, for our parents, for our teachers, so that we are aware of what's going on around us. The intelligence network, we went through this on an earlier slide, and here it is summarized again as all of those elements. What the awareness and the intelligence do is put us in a position that we can get the tip. Here's the advice. This person, I'm concerned about them. And so we take that information in, we track it, we follow it up, and we do this initial risk categorization. And there are tools and procedures that you look through and questions that you can ask, and we can share all of that with you. Now you put it in a central repository, and we do analytics on it. Is it increasing? Are there multiple events? Is it linked to something else? There was something that happened last week. How does it come in? How does it play together? We then, on a regular basis, have our behavioral management team, our threat management team in the school, analyze that. They conduct investigations as they're needed, and then they do a behavioral risk screening. Now you'll notice there's two different terms here. Initially, it's a risk categorization. If it's a behavior that we're concerned about, then we're going to go through a formal risk screening, and there are tools that step you through and forms to complete to make sure that you've thought of everything. Then the behavioral management team would take action, have a case management or a plan of how they work with it. As it de-escalates and things are done, there's a sign-off, goes back into a central repository. There are other things needed in a school, and that's in that green box down there, in particular like an emergency protocol. And we recommend following the standard protocol: shelter in place, lockout, lockdown, evacuate, security assessments and plans. You need to know where the vulnerabilities at our school, and particularly thinking around words like access become extremely important. So I want to go through this flow a little bit more of, hey, something has come forward. How do we make a decision? The initial risk categorization is done by an administrator on duty. We recommend that you give that. I know you've got a head of school or a dean of a particular group or a principal in an area, but if you want to have someone responsible today and somebody tonight or over the weekend when we've got programs, and we recommend having a cell phone with a unique number that is done so that everybody knows that's the number to get to the administrator on duty. That's different than having it be your cell number, because you may or may not take that call. If the administrator on duty's phone rings, it must be action, and action are taken. Now, the main responsibility when this initial report comes in is to put it into one of three buckets: routine, investigate, or urgent. Routine, it's a normal discipline problem. It's an issue. We know about it. We got a standard procedure. We handle this in our school all the time. We'll monitor it. We'll just deal with it. And it goes into that central repository that we talked about. Let's go to the other extreme, that red box on the right. It's an urgent action. Somebody's standing there with a gun. We're calling 911. It's a life safety concern. We're going through our standard protocol, our lockout or lockdown procedures or evacuate. We remove the threat. So schools have historically done an A job on the routine and an A job on the urgent, of understanding that difference. Where the confusion comes in is that middle area. It's a little more than routine. It's not already up to a violent act. How do we make a decision? We escalate that from the administrator on duty to the threat management team or the behavioral management team. I'm using those two terms interchangeably. In a work environment, we generally call it a threat management team. In a school environment, it's a little kinder and gentler to call it a behavioral management team. And there's a formal behavioral risk screening process that they go through to determine what do we need to do in this situation. You'll notice in all three of these initial decisions, the information flows into the central repository. Let's assume for a minute that this came up as an investigate in this initial action in the central repository. It goes to that behavioral management team, that threat management team, and you see the actions they're taking in that top blue box as they go through it. There are forms and specific questions where you answer the question, and that helps to determine where they fall. Now, we're looking at this really on a continuum from guarded, elevated, severe, and finally imminent. Let's go back to the guarded. Now, remember, this is someone that's already cleared the first hurdle. We think we need to do an investigation. So you do your investigation. You interview the people that are involved. You do whatever checks you have to put into place. You fill out the forms, and it leads you to a decision. You know, we're going to just kind of work with this student. We're going to have a plan. There's going to be some intervention going on. We're going to monitor. We don't think it's going to continue to escalate, but we're going to remain on guard, hence the word guarded. Now, we've started our investigation, and we find out, wait a minute, it's about to happen. It's imminent. It's really like that gun in the door, that imminent risk. We're not even going to wait. We're calling 911. We're getting the student out of the school because we've got to protect everyone else that's involved. Just below that level, it could be a severe risk. We think that they're on a path that could lead to violence. We think they're a danger to themselves or others. We've gone through the evaluation. We've done the risk screening. It's clearly that all those markers are there. We have to do some things. We're going to suspend the student. We're going to have the parents take the student to a psychologist or a forensic psychologist or a psychiatrist, and we're looking for an opinion that that child is no longer a risk to themselves or others before we let them come back into school. Think about it this way. If I had a contagious disease, would you want me coming to school and getting your other students sick? And the answer is no, Jim, we wouldn't want that. Well, the same thing happens with that level of behavior, that there's a path to violence, that there's just no question. Let's assume you've sent them to the forensic psychologist, and they've had counseling, and they've had sessions and intervention, and the psychologist says the student is no longer a risk to themselves or others, and you have a written statement. Then you'd have a reentry plan that you would do with the parents and with the student, and then you'd have a very detailed case management plan of how we're going to monitor this young person in a school environment. The elevated risk falls between that guarded and severe. We've done the information. We think that there are elements here that could continue to move up. We're going to let them remain in the school, but we're going to have some coordination. Maybe we talk to a forensic psychologist to say, here's what we're seeing, what do you recommend? If you need that assistance, by the way, Firestorm has the access to a virtual forensic psychologist that can speak with you and help advise your threat management team on what to do. Then whatever the actions are, we go back to that central repository, we get signatures on the forms, everybody knows what's going on, the parents, the child, the teacher, and the threat management team in dealing with these areas. Where we have seen disasters occur, or where it comes down to one person making the decision instead of the team, that's the biggest safeguard that you can have for everyone every time. It looks like there's a lot of detail here, and there is. This is a process that's been developed over the last 5 years because it's absolutely critical. We do the same thing the same way every time for the protection of everyone involved. So if you go back and you kind of pull those program components together, you see them listed here. Awareness, training everyone on the warning signs. The reporting, you have to have anonymous reporting. You have to have a central repository, and then the plan. Investigate, screening, action plan for the subject and case management, monitoring, sign-off, and record keeping. If you have a student who has a problem in the 9th grade, we're going to continue to monitor them in the 10th, the 11th, and the 12th. This is a program so that we're dealing with these behaviors of concern and not dealing with violent acts. We're not sitting here today trying to teach you how to disarm someone with a gun pointed at someone else. There are programs that will do that. We work in conjunction with many of those, and that's important. But the biggest safety factor we can have is dealing with those behaviors before they escalate. I want to briefly talk about, can you predict crisis? And the answer is yes. We're looking at warning signs, and they're clear indicators that we're in a pre-crisis environment, and that's what we've been talking about today. Predictive intelligence, I want you to know that social media is not random, it's targeted. Yes, there are millions and millions of posts, but they're about a person or an event or a location. And it's a chaotic conversation, and we've got to look at it in a systematic manner. Firestorm does social media monitoring and open source intelligence for a large number of schools. Fortunately, it's fairly inexpensive because the software, once we set up what we're looking for, it alerts us if that's in fact occurring. People know, and when they know, they talk. I gave you statistics earlier. Words matter and intents matter. And finally, a career for all those English majors out there. We're looking at semantics of speech, syntax, context, and idiom to determine, is this person on a path to violence? So we listen. We listen to those conversations where they occur. It could be on Instagram. It could be on Twitter. It could be in a variety of areas. We're not hacking into private accounts, but if it's in a public area and we can see it, maybe an initial posting was made behind a password protection, but it was later posted on a board, then we can see it in the open area. And we do that because we're looking, and I'll talk about look and listen in just a minute. But the key thing here I'm trying to convey is a sense of urgency. You can't wait until tomorrow. You need to know today. You need to understand those behaviors of concern so that you can take actions in predicting. We had a commercial account. It's 800 restaurants. It's a large food account. And I got a call from their chief risk officer on a Wednesday in September. And he called and said, look, it's 3 o'clock, and we've had someone anonymously post on our Facebook account that they're going to go to a specific restaurant, and they're going to kill everybody there on Friday. Can you help? I said, don't know, but we'll try. So Karen, our chief intelligence officer, starts doing research, and we were able to figure out the person's first name. We were able to figure out his girlfriend's name. We were able to figure out his last name and his home address. We went back to the client in 2 hours and said, look, this is who it is. It's a 17-year-old boy who was working in the restaurant, who was fired, and he's trying to come back on Friday and even the score. They took that information and went and met with the parents, the police did, that night, and I can imagine that was not an overly warm and fuzzy conversation to deal with it, but it's important that it was dealing with it before the gun went to the restaurant and before the actions occurred. By the way, while that was going on, we also put up a geofence around the restaurant that had been threatened and monitored the social media in and out, and we were able to uncover that the manager of that restaurant was selling drugs out the back door. So in 2 hours, Firestorm was able to determine who is going to be the killer and who is the drug dealer. Tune in next week and see what happens on our show. It's a different world that from what we grew up in. We're not in Kansas anymore. So there are two things to do. One is listen, one is look. As we think about listening is talking about the streams, the phrases, and the words. It's creating a general awareness. Think of it as a tripwire. Looking is where we're focused in on a specific event, the fall festival, the big football game. We're looking at a location. We're looking at a particular person. And with this, we can determine spheres of influence. Who else are they talking with? Who else is involved in it? And it gives us a chance to look and be aware. We also have the ability with those tools to go back in time. What did they post on Tuesday of last week? What about Tuesday the week before? Is this escalating? Is it de-escalating? What does it mean? Where do we go and how do we operate? So it's a different world as we think about it. So recommendations. You need to have a plan. If you don't have a plan to deal with this, you're going to find yourself waiting to react when that gun walks through the front door of the school. Not the position we want to be in. You want to have a plan in dealing with the things in the big red box, the warning signs, the behaviors of concern, the anonymous reporting, the ability to have a threat assessment, the awareness and involvement. You need support resources. I'd recommend you identify a psychiatrist or forensic psychologist in your area. If you need help, let us know as a resource. Firestorm is certainly available to do that. By the way, there's now in new insurance products dealing with active shooter or deadly weapon. It could be a gap in your school's insurance, and it probably makes sense for you to explore that. And the other big advantage is many of those insurance programs come with additional resources and training. So it's not a matter of just insurance, it's a matter of risk management that you gain from it. You need to have an open source intelligence network and monitoring, and there's software that will do it, that will send you an alert, and now you know here's what's being said, by whom, so you can go specifically there and deal with it. Training and testing. You need to train everybody on their warning signs and signals. You need to train your threat management team on how they do either the risk categorization or the risk screening, putting the plans together in place, and then you need to test all your plans. Your plans get better by testing. We did an exercise earlier this month on video streaming and cyberbullying and sexting, sitting down and talking about what would we do if we were faced with this situation and how do we manage it will make a difference. So next steps. First, I recommend that you update your threat assessment for your school campus. Once every 3 years, I recommend a formal security assessment, and we're going to focus on particular aspects of access. Also, remember, your school looks different from the day and the night, and look at the lighting and dead spots and vegetation next to buildings, all of those particular areas and how that's dealt and controlled. So I would recommend that you do that in once every 3 years. Second, plan. Make sure your crisis management plan aligns with best practices. We have an assessment that we can do for you to help in that particular area. You want to develop a behavioral risk threat assessment program. You don't want to wait to just deal with this with an armed intruder. And then you need to finalize a communications plan on how we're going to communicate and what are our message maps there. Perform. You can contact us. One of the benefits that Firestorm provides through the Virginia Association of Independent Schools is our Crisis Stop program. If you think you're in a crisis, you can pick up the phone and call Firestorm 24/7. We'll get on the phone with you. We'll help to slow this down and help you understand what's happening, because the decisions that you make, the actions that you take, and the words that you say in the first hour will determine, is this going to escalate or de-escalate? Is it going to stabilize or spin out of control? And that first hour consultation comes to you at no cost because of your membership in the Virginia Association. We would stabilize, try to help you take a look at what's going on, trigger the appropriate responses and resources that you need, opine on what's going to happen next and the consequences, and finally the P stands for helping you prevent the common mistakes. I recommend you look at your insurance and make sure that the types of threats and risks that you have are in fact covered, and have them look at your response plans and assure you that they are. If you do a test exercise, hand it to your insurance broker and ask them, how does my insurance respond here? And finally, stress test your plans. There is a brief on today's discussion. I believe it is up on the website now, or if not, it'll be up very shortly. You can go there to the section marked Resources, Recorded Webinars and Brief, and click there and download the brief, Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment. How do you stop bullying, suicide, and guns before it's too late? So our thanks go out to the Virginia Association of Independent Schools. This is a long-standing relationship that Firestorm has had there, and we look forward to working with you and your schools. Because we had so many people on today, it's impossible to take questions, but I know that Ken and Ryan will be reaching out to everyone who attended today to answer your questions. You can go to firestorm.com to get the information we've talked about and watch previous webinars or download the briefs. If you have a question, send us an email at webinars@firestorm, or call us at 800-321-2219. I wanted to stop and spend a minute just to thank you for what you've done. The work that you do in your school every day, it's a mission. The way that you're helping our young people grow academically, morally, spiritually, athletically, and interpersonally is absolutely essential. You're making a difference in lives every single day. We do not want to put you in a position that we found when we arrived at Virginia Tech. We were there with 10 people for 12 days dealing with the aftermath of that event. Dr. Charles Steger, the president of Virginia Tech, had to pick up the phone 32 times and call and say, your loved one's not coming home today. No one wants to be in that position. We're fortunate today that there are programs like this that can identify the behaviors of concern. There are ways for you to become aware so that you can do the things that make your school special and intervene. Thank you again. That concludes our webinar. Until next month, I hope it's a great day. And by the way, don't forget it's Valentine's. Buy those presents now. Talk to you later. Have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.